FN and ballista, phantom sight, Lula Magnum rounds, she said to the wall of rifles, as if placing an order at a coffee bar. The laughter stopped like someone had yanked a plug from the room. Oil and metal air hung still. Fluorescent lights hummed alone. A clerk's half-raised smirk wilted. Even the old man with the chewed cigar paused mid-chew, the cylinder of brown leaf drooping at the corner of his mouth. Somewhere behind the counter, a pen clicked twice and then forgot how to click. Emily adjusted the strap of her frayed canvas backpack and took one more step inside. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile, loud as a verdict. She looked like a wrong turn. Wrinkled windbreaker, plain jeans, hair caught into a simple tie that never tried to be more than functional. Everything about her said lost. Everything about her words said exactly the opposite. "Sweetie," the receptionist purred from behind a gleaming glass case. Name tag shouting Karen in cheerful block letters. "You sure you didn't mean to hit the bakery next door? We got real hardware here, not bread knives." A few low chuckles warmed themselves on the insult. The firearms instructor, tactical pants bulging with pockets that had their own swagger, tipped his chin at the assault rifle wall. "We don't sell cosplay gear. Comic-Con's downtown." Emily's mouth didn't move. She let the comments pass like weather over a stone. The gunwale mirrored the room back at itself. Black steel and matte polymer, glossy scopes like unblinking eyes. She counted screws, rail slots, muzzle brakes. Nothing to prove, only her hands quietly checking an old map against new terrain. The old-timer leaned around a rack, belly testing a camo shirt's buttons. "You even know which end kicks, princess," he rasped, smoke flaring like punctuation. Emily answered the air, not him. "Precision models." The apprentice, freckled, eager, anger pitched like an engine forever in second gear, circled with a grease rag. "Precision?" He made the word into gum to chew. "What's in the bag? Lunch from the dumpster? We don't serve beggars." A few more laughs, thin now, like a party that suddenly remembered Monday exists. Emily tightened her grip on the strap until the seam creaked, then exhaled and released. The breath reset something inside her. A switch flipped in a room only she could enter. When she was 8 on the range in the pines, wind shoving cold fingers under her sleeves, her father had set a brass timer on the table and said, "Power isn't in the shout. It's in the silence that follows." She learned at the cost of childhood ease how to make quiet heavy. "Self-defense pistols right there," the store manager said, arriving from a back office with a clipboard like a shield. His tone was used to settling things. Simple, reliable, small hands, small frame. "FN ballista," Emily repeated, soft as a blade. "Phantom sight config. Leola Magnum." Karen's pen finally found itself again and clicked fast, as if speed could knit a new reality. Beside her, a collector in a designer jacket snorted like a judge who'd already ruled. "Off the market 6 years. Testing ban. You read that on a forum?" Emily's gaze slid to the far case, the one with the good glass and the quiet locks. "I used it on the northern border," she said, "in a snowstorm." The sound that passed through the room wasn't laughter. It was the noise people make when they don't know which drawer to put a sentence into. The ex-cop who wore his badge like a participation medal let his voice swell, eager to restore order. "Northern border, cute. Save bedtime stories for TikTok, sweetheart. That windbreaker wouldn't last 5 minutes in real cold." Emily let that one pass too. The instructor crossed his arms. A retired ranger with scars like a road map of regret thumped his cane once, performing his rank like a credential. A lanky teen craned for a video angle, hunger for a viral failure sharpening his grin. "Show me the precision models," Emily said again, and the manager, against his better cynicism, motioned to a case. He didn't know why he obeyed. Maybe it was her tone. Maybe it was the way she occupied space without asking permission to keep it. He lifted 2 long guns to the counter, reluctant respect making his movements careful. The taller guy with neck tattoos, weekend warrior built out of protein shakes and borrowed valor, hauled a heavy sniper off a rack and thrust it toward her like a dare. "All right then, try lifting this without whining." Emily gave him the sort of glance you give a child who has mistaken volume for power and took the rifle one-handed. The weight flowed through her forearm into Latin heel, body aligning on muscle memory. She didn't pose. She didn't grimace. She pivoted the barrel, checked the scope's play with a touch that felt like reading Braille, and set the rifle down exactly where it would not roll. "Lucky grab," the collector muttered. "I'll wait for the fumble." "I'm adjusting for wind drift," Emily said, not looking up. "You ever use a triple sight system?" The question landed in the room like a dropped tool. Someone in the back swallowed audibly. Karen tried to resurrect the mood. "Wind drift. In here," she said, and even she heard the forced tin in her voice. The old-timer's cigar stub made a small, embarrassed circle in the ashtray. The instructor edged closer, curiosity prying a small crack in his smirk. "You a competitive shooter?" Emily's eyes stayed on the rails, fingers measuring, distance by feel. "I don't compete." "Then how do you know a phantom sight from a fashion blog?" asked the ex-cop, eager again, searching for the track he'd lost. He tipped his chin at her backpack. "Proof?" Emily's hand paused above a display box, knuckles pale for the length of a heartbeat, then relaxed. She folded her arms, not in defiance, but in a posture of waiting she had practiced through storms. Let the room tire itself out. In the glass, her reflection offered back a face no one would stop for on the sidewalk. Unadorned, composed, uninteresting in a way that kept her safe in crowds. People forgot you even as they stared straight at you. Useful in the old life. "Power's in the silence that follows," her father's voice repeated, spooling up from some basement in her memory. But her mother's voice was there too, floating down from a chandeliered gallery, a reprimand disguised as concern. "Try not to look so ordinary, Emily. People will think you aren't trying." At 12, she had hit the 300-meter plate with a rifle too long for her arms, and the butler had clapped because no one else was allowed to. At 20, she lay in snow for 12 hours and learned the precise difference between shivering and readiness. At 21, she became a paragraph erased from a report that no longer existed. "Hey!" The apprentice snapped his rag, impatience flaring now that his audience felt unsteady. "We got a demo range. You want to keep pretending, or you want to—" "Range is for members," the owner cut in, a grizzled veteran with a limp you were expected to admire. "And for customers." Emily looked at the manager. "I'm a customer," she said. "I came to buy." The manager's thumb ran along the stock of a rifle with a familiar intimacy, thought briefly about liability, headlines, the way stories grow teeth online, and then surprised himself a second time that day. "We'll do one shot," he said. "Supervised, controlled, behind the glass." The room exhaled all at once, like a crowd at intermission, deciding whether to stay for Act 2 or go home early to brag about the part they'd already seen. The blogger lifted his phone higher, the little microphone clipped to his collar, suddenly a wand he believed made him powerful. The teen shifted to get the range window in frame. Karen clicked her pen. The old-timer adjusted his posture to a stance labeled skepticism, which is just wonder with its arms crossed. "Before we do this," the ex-cop said, swelling again, "we need ID. Rules." The acne-pocked clerk reached for emphasis. Emily slid a silver card from a pocket, scuffed, thin, weighty in the way certain metals are when they've been stamped somewhere that matters. The clerk snorted. "Expired. 8 years. He held it up like a trophy. "Fake as my ex's eyelashes." Emily took it back gently. "I don't belong in your system," she said. Not defiance. Fact. The owner hesitated. He wasn't a fool. He also wasn't immune to the electricity humming through the shop. He nodded to the range door. "One shot," he repeated. "If you punch paper, we're done. If you bounce off the first layer, we're done. Nobody sue me." Emily took the rifle the way a pianist takes a seat, not for show, for work. She moved toward the rear hallway, past posters that pretended bullets were simple, past a whiteboard where someone had written in block letters, "Safety is respect." The camera phones followed, a skitter of blue-white screens. The range door thunked. Glass partition, 4 layers, red dot waiting beyond, a small heart inside a small heart. She stepped to the line. Breath in. The station smelled like rubber and detergent. The barrel found the exact gravity she wanted. She let the world tunnel. When you're prone in snow, you can hear the tick of ice forming on your eyelashes. When you're here, you hear the conditioner thrum and a distant pen finally stop clicking. On you, the manager said, softer now. Her finger took up slack and then found the crisp. The shot broke. Ping. Silence fell so hard the dust decided to freeze. A spider web of fractures ran across the stack. All 4 layers sang, a chorus of thin glass bells, and at their center, the red dot wore a small, uncompromised hole. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of silence. Emily let the muzzle settle, safed, stepped back. No smile. No, told you so. The world outside the glass, the men who needed to be certain, the women who enforced the chorus, the boys who wanted a clip they could caption, looked suddenly misdressed for the weather. The instructor's arms unknotted without permission. The old-timer's cigar found the floor where he mashed it out as if crushing evidence. "Who are you?" the owner asked, voicing the thing that had swelled until it had to become sound. Emily slid her silver card back into its pocket, shouldered the backpack that did not look heavy until you knew what it carried, and answered the question with the smallest refusal. "A customer," she said. "Still shopping." The blogger's phone buzzed in his hand. The teen blinked, forgetting to record. Karen's pen had gone still and might never click again. The manager glanced toward the showroom like a man who understands his day has changed shape. "Back out front," he said, clearing his throat, trying to recast the scene as policy. "We'll talk models." Emily stepped through the door the way she had entered the shop, as if the space belonged to anyone who walked through it without apology. The laughter did not return to the room. There are sounds that do not survive certain facts. Behind her, the cracked panels hummed softly as they cooled. The room tried to snap back to its old shape after the shot, the way a dented fender tries to remember the car it used to be. Karen reached for the familiar script first. "Okay," she said brightly, too brightly. "Cute parlor trick. That panel was due for replacement anyway." Her smile showed more enamel than confidence. She clicked her pen twice, the sound thin and frantic, as if she could staple the moment back into place. The instructor coughed in his fist, folding his arms again, like a man zipping up a jacket that suddenly doesn't fit. "Range conditions are controlled," he announced to no one, to everyone. "Real world introduces variables. Wind shear, humidity, heart rate. Wind drift is a variable," Emily said mildly, "not an excuse." Her gaze moved along the counter to the long guns in their tempered glass terrarium. "The triple sight compensates for parallax at odd angles. The phantom rig lets you live at the edge of target and still trust your math." The old-timer recovered his cigar from the floor like a veteran retrieving a dropped flag. He tucked it behind his ear, defiant. "You got lucky," he muttered. "Beginner's charm." "Luck is real," Emily said. "It just doesn't stack like that." She wasn't correcting him so much as correcting the room's relationship to what had happened. Her tone had the patience of someone who has repeated oxygen facts to people, determined to argue with air. The collector in the designer jacket, thin patience, thinner credit, laughed too loudly. "Specs don't make a shooter," he said, checking to see who would nod. "I've got pieces you can only read about. Museums call me." "Do they call you for your groups?" Emily asked. "Or your glass cases?" He went silent in the way men do when a question has found the chord that turns them off. The truth was, she didn't need their approval because there had been long seasons when approval wasn't an available resource. In the Morgan house, compliments were rationed like cold fruit. Discipline was the food you could always count on. After dinner, silverware aligned like soldiers on a white field, her father would push his plate away and bring out the little brass timer. He'd set it with a faint mechanical whir that became the room's metronome. "When the bell rings," he'd say, "you don't shoot, you breathe. Power isn't in the shout, it's in the silence that follows." On the private range buried in pines, she learned the small algebra of distance, how sound touches snow, how a heartbeat travels up the barrel if you let it, how a glove becomes a lie if it keeps your trigger finger from feeling the exact click you're waiting for. She learned to be ordinary on purpose. Her mother taught that lesson, not with timers, but with glances. "Try not to be noticed, darling," she'd murmur at galas where chandeliers made rain out of light, "unless there's reason to be." The Morgan women were expected to be context, not headline. That was the paradox that shaped her. A family that owned rooms from behind curtains, a daughter taught to disappear in the middle of them. Show us a trick anyone can learn, the ex-cop pressed, tugging his belt, his badge catching light like a cheap miracle. Something a normal person could use. Your triple whatever. No one here needs that ninja toy. Nobody here? Emily echoed, eyes drifting briefly across the faces. Hunters who loved stories more than seasons. Weekend warriors who loved uniforms more than use. One lanky teen whose phone had slowly lowered from his face because something about what he'd seen had felt like the opposite of meme. Normal people use fundamentals. Sight picture, breath, trigger discipline. Exit plan, Karen scoffed. What are you, a movie? Everyone here has one whether they built it or not, Emily said. Some of you plan for glory. That's not a plan, that's a wish. She didn't say it with contempt. She said it like a weather report. When she was 20, a recruiter never called a recruiter offered her a scholarship to a school that didn't exist on a brochure. It was pitched at a winter luncheon as a leadership intensive. Her father's eyes slid to hers in a way that meant the choice was both hers and not. In the facility up north, walls painted a color that did not participate in mood. They taught her how to disappear between two blinks. There were no medals on those walls. There were timers and maps and a philosophy. Be the pause in the other side's sentence. An instructor with a scar that never tanned told her quietly, "You will be erased to be effective. If you need applause, leave now. If you need a name, leave now." She stayed, not because she was brave, because she was good at assignments. "Ma'am," the acne-prone clerk said now, voice trying to find authority it didn't own, "we're going to have to verify your—" He gestured vaguely at the silver card he'd mocked a moment ago, now back in her pocket. "Company policy." The manager gave him a look. He wasn't ready to put his name on any document that would try to verify a thing that was currently holding the air together in his store. "Let's not make it weird, Tyler," he muttered. "It's already weird," Karen snapped, relief coming when she could turn the mob back on. "She's a liar or a plant. Nobody with money and training walks in here looking like—" Her hands circled, trying to gather Emily's windbreaker, plain hair, and quiet into a single insult. "Like that." Emily didn't flinch. That old cousin's voice from long ago scraped briefly across her memory. "You look like the help, Em," and slid away. The range boards. Your worth is not measured by their adjectives. The program's catechism. You are armor where attention goes to die. "What do you want?" the instructor asked suddenly, softer, maybe to break the spell of Karen's spiraling. "If not a pistol, if not cosplay." His mouth twisted around the last word. He had heard himself earlier, and now he couldn't unhear it. "A tool that does what it promises," Emily said. "Something honest." "Honest," the retired ranger barked, offended. "You calling us liars, girl?" "I'm calling some of your stories edits," she replied, turning to him with what might have been respect. "Honesty is groups on paper, not tales over beer." That got a cough of laughter from the corner, short and involuntary. The blogger lowered his phone a fraction to smother his own grin. Then he remembered himself and swung the lens back up. "So you're, what, a ghost? Some Black Ops Barbie?" Because my audience loves a backstory. "My life is not your content," Emily said, still mild. The sentence landed and sat there, refusing to be processed into entertainment. The blogger's cheeks colored. The teen's eyes flicked to him and then away. The manager cleared his throat, a man eager to move the room back onto rails. "You said you're shopping," he said, thawing the air with customer service. "What are you actually here to buy?" "Old rounds," Emily replied, "if you have them." "For a platform nobody's supposed to have," the collector muttered. But it sounded to his own ears like jealousy, and he hated that. So he stopped talking. The tall guy with the neck tattoos, the first to push a rifle at her, recovered enough to try on cruelty again, like a jacket he hoped would feel right if he wore it longer. "You got a safe full of ghosts, princess?" he scoffed. "Bet your daddy pays your tax stamps and your trainer holds your hand?" "My father taught me to pay attention," Emily said. "My trainers taught me to pay cash." She did not add that the most expensive thing she'd ever paid was her name. Back in the snow that first year, her lips had cracked until they bled, and she learned to keep the blood off the stock not because anyone told her to, but because wood remembers. Back at the manor that spring, a great aunt had asked in a voice like silver, "Still playing outside, dear?" Emily had smiled and said, "Always," and the old woman had nodded, thinking the girl meant tennis. That was the tenor of her life. 2 truths in parallel, one for the room, one for the work. "Let's be simple," the ex-cop said, tone brusque with the confidence of men who've never been inside a court they didn't understand. "You claim you ran gear off a banned line. You claim you ran it in conditions that break lesser shooters. Anyone can claim. Can you teach?" Emily blinked. That wasn't the question she'd expected. "Teach who?" "Her," he said, jerking his chin at Karen, then at the clerk, then at the teen, oddly generous in the wrong way. "Teach anyone something real in 10 minutes. If you can, I'll—" He groped for currency, found humility, rejected it. "I'll admit you got more than luck." Karen bristled. "I don't need a lesson," she said at the exact moment the teen blurted, "I do." The room laughed, gently this time, surprised by the interruption of sincerity. Emily studied the boy's hands, thin, fidgeting, eager to please and be seen. She glanced at the manager. He shrugged, surrendering to the afternoon's drift. The instructor half lifted a shoulder. "Your circus." "Okay," Emily said to the teen. 10 minutes, but not with a live weapon." She tapped the counter. "Dry fire and breath." "Boring," the tall guy stage whispered. No one laughed with him. She slid a blue training pistol from a drawer. Karen passed it over, eyes narrow but curious despite herself, and cleared it theatrically for the room. She nodded to the teen. "Feet under you, hips over arches. Don't pretend to be bigger than you are. Physics hates pretense." He obeyed, awkward at first, then grateful for instruction that didn't condescend. "Sight picture," she said. "Front sight is truth. Rear sight is a committee. Ignore the committee." A few people snorted despite themselves. "Now breathe. Pay attention to your exhale. Freeze. Not your lungs, your want. Want is tremor." The boy pressed out, the toy muzzle trembling less than before. "Trigger," she said. "Press the pad straight back. Don't slap. Don't whisper. Talk to it like it's a skittish horse." The click was clean and startlingly crisp in the quiet room. "Again," she said. "Make the same click." He did. Again, again. Each time the click sounded like a small decision made correctly. Karen leaned involuntarily, as if proximity could grant competence. The instructor, frowning, realized he was unconsciously matching his breath to the cadence of her coaching. The old-timer whispered, "Huh," which in his dialect meant "I learned something and will deny it later." 10 minutes, Emily said, stepping back. The boy grinned, concentration and pride crashing into each other adorably. He handed the blue gun back with reverence, like a monk returning a bell. The ex-cop opened his mouth, then closed it, then nodded once, a stiff motion, like a hinge that hasn't moved in years. "That's real," he said, grudging but honest. Karen found her pen again and tried to twirl it. It fell. She laughed, and it wasn't mean. "So, she asked, looking at Emily, the way you look at a language you might be willing to learn. "What's an exit plan? For here?" "Know where the help is before you need it," Emily said. "Know who will freeze. Know who will follow. Don't confuse loud with useful. Keep your hands empty until they need to be full." The manager's clipboard lowered, his eyes flicking to his staff, his layout, the door that sticks on humid days. He had thought himself prepared. He realized he was rehearsed. Somewhere outside, a helicopter thumbed the air, faint, then gone, the noise of a city with too many stories stacked. The blogger's phone buzzed with a notification he didn't read, his feed suddenly less interesting than the floor under his sneakers. "What do you want me to write up?" the manager asked, gentle now, not because he was intimidated, but because he had remembered what a real customer sounds like. He gestured at the long guns. "Paperwork is worse than shooting." "Old rounds if you have them," Emily said again. "And if you don't—" She stopped, head lifting a fraction, a small animal hearing something human ears pretend not to. For a second her face went distant, not away from, but towards something. She shook it off and returned to the counter. Then something honest that points straight, the ranger grunted. And after that, girl? After that, Emily said, I'm going to walk out of here the same way I walked in. She didn't add what the room could not know, that sometimes the exit plan arrives without being asked for, that sometimes a life you've kept folded under your windbreaker knocks politely, then loudly, then lands on the roof with rotor wash. The helicopter sound didn't fade. It multiplied. Low, chopping, confident. Not police, too disciplined. Not news, too silent between blades. The hum settled like a second ceiling over the store. Inside, everyone heard it, but no one wanted to be the first to ask. Karen froze mid-sentence, the pen finally motionless between her fingers. The manager glanced toward the door, then toward Emily. She stood still, profile turned slightly to the street-facing windows, head tilted in the way of people listening for coordinates instead of melody. Delivery? The ex-cop muttered, though his voice broke on the second syllable. The old-timer leaned against the counter, cigar trembling slightly. That ain't UPS. Emily exhaled through her nose, the sigh not quite human. It was calibration. Then she spoke, almost to herself. They're early. Who's early? Karen asked, voice brittle. What are you talking about? But Emily was already moving. Not fast, not slow, exactly paced, like choreography written for necessity. She picked up her backpack, unslung it with a quiet clink of metal, and placed it on the counter. Her fingers undid the zipper with small, deliberate motions. The instructor took a cautious step back. Ma'am, if that's a weapon, it's a phone, she said. Just older than yours. From the pack, she drew what looked like an obsolete satellite handset, scuffed black casing with no brand. The small red light on its side pulsed once, then steadied. She pressed her thumb to a recessed scanner. A tone answered. Low, approving, proprietary. Karen blinked. What the hell is that? A signal relay, Emily said, sliding the device into her pocket. And an invitation. The ex-cop barked a laugh too loud for the moment. Invitation to what, lady? Your cosplay reunion? But the manager wasn't laughing. He watched the street through the blinds. 2 black SUVs and something sleeker setting down behind them. The sound of rotor wash bloomed, then subsided into disciplined stillness. The store door opened before anyone decided who would touch it. 2 figures entered, one in civilian clothes, the other in black tactical wool that didn't need patches to announce authority. Their faces were bare. The taller of the 2 scanned the room once, cataloging exits, personnel, threat ratios. Then his eyes found Emily, and the calculation paused. Captain Morgan, he said quietly. Emily didn't correct him. Sir, she replied. The word landed like metal against marble. The instructor's jaw dropped. Captain? Karen's pen rolled off the counter and hit the tile with a pop that made everyone flinch. The man in black nodded toward the door. We've been trying to locate you for 36 months. I was busy, Emily said. What's the flag? He pulled a thin envelope from his coat. Gray paper. No markings except an embossed triangle with no corners touching. He held it out. She took it without looking inside. Do you have any idea how hard you are to find? He asked, and something like warmth crept into his tone. I designed it that way, she said. The blogger's phone, still raised though his hand trembled, caught all of it. The other operative turned toward him. Delete that. The blogger stammered. It's just... Delete, the operative repeated, tone flat as a wall. The phone blinked, screen dying by command from a signal no one in the room could name. Karen whispered, Jesus. Emily finally faced the store's spectators. Her eyes scanned them like someone checking inventory. None of this concerns you, she said. What you saw was skill, not story. Keep it that way. The instructor swallowed. What's happening? She looked at him, kindly almost. An old job. I thought it was over. Ghost program? The manager ventured, the phrase like a rumor he wasn't sure he believed in until he heard himself say it. The man in black looked at him. That name was never supposed to leave debrief. Guess it didn't, the manager said, pale. Only ever heard it from someone who owed me a favor. Said they trained people to vanish between frames of a camera. Emily tucked the gray envelope into her jacket. They trained us to stop things before they started, she said, and to disappear after. The ex-cop took a step forward, anger breaking through his confusion. You're telling us you're some kind of assassin? Government hit squad? Emily's look was not denial but gravity. I'm a cleaner, she said, when diplomacy fails and violence hasn't begun yet. No one moved. The operative in wool finally broke the silence. Ma'am, extraction's ready. There's chatter about your old sector. The kind you warned us about. Her jaw tightened. Civilian crossfire? Potential, high-value leverage. Karen found her voice again, high and nervous. You brought that here? Emily shook her head. It was already here. I just heard it first. Through the window the SUVs idled. The rotor sound built again, softer now, as if politely waiting. She turned to the manager. You have a daughter, she said, not asking. His eyes widened. How? Don't worry, she's fine. Keep her that way. If anyone from defense or intelligence asks about me, say you remember a woman with no accent who asked for a phantom sight. Nothing more. He nodded, the kind of nod that isn't agreement, but survival. She looked down at the boy who had trained with the blue pistol. You did well, she said. Remember what we practiced. His voice cracked. Are you coming back? Not for a while, she said. And it wasn't a lie, but it wasn't hope either. The man in black opened the door. Cold air swept in, carrying the taste of exhaust and urgency. Emily turned once more to the room. Every face stared, each for different reasons. Awe, fear, disbelief, envy. She met them all with the same calm that had unnerved them earlier. You'll forget the sound of my name in a week, she said. That's by design. Then she was gone. The door shut, and the helicopter's thrum grew until it wasn't a sound, but a pressure behind the eyes. Someone exhaled shakily. The instructor, maybe. Holy God, Karen whispered. The old-timer sank onto a stool. Was she real? The manager didn't answer. He just looked at the cracked bulletproof panel still hanging in its frame, the hole perfectly centered. The room smelled faintly of cordite and disbelief. The boy picked up the fallen pen from the floor, turning it over like an artifact. Outside, through the blinds, the helicopter rose between the clouds, swallowed by the sky before the brain could name the color. Miles away, the aircraft leveled out over the river. Inside, Emily sat across from the operative. Between them, the gray envelope lay sealed, the embossed triangle catching the low cabin light. You could have refused, he said. I don't refuse, she replied. You said you were done. I am, that's why they called. He studied her. We thought you died in Belarus. I did, she said. The engine's hum filled the space. The pilot's voice came through the headset, measured and professional. ETA, 23 minutes. Orders are waiting at base. Emily leaned her head back, eyes half closed. The world blurred into rhythm again. The timer in the pine forest, the smell of old gun oil, her father's voice. Power isn't in the shout. The operative glanced at her hand, where a faint scar traced the ridge of her palm like a map line. You miss it? What? The quiet after the shot. She smiled without showing teeth. That's the only part I ever liked. Below, the city shrank, the gun store becoming just another box on the grid. Inside it, disbelief would be fermenting into legend by now. People would talk. They always did. Then the story would dilute, mutate, vanish. Ghosts weren't meant to be remembered. Emily reached for the envelope. The wax seal cracked under her thumb with the soft sound of finality. She unfolded the single sheet. Her eyes skimmed the brief text. Target Alpha, status, unconfirmed. Location, domestic. Her expression didn't change, but her pulse did. Domestic? She asked. Yes, ma'am, the operative said. They say it's personal this time. She looked out the window. The clouds were pale and directionless, the kind that don't predict weather, but hide it. Everything's personal, she said. The helicopter banked east. Below, the river coiled like a line being drawn. The city vanished under distance and fog. They put her down at a riverside airfield that pretended to be a logistics depot. Rows of anonymous hangars, forklifts that rarely forked. Men in orange vests who saluted with their eyes instead of their hands. The helicopter's rotors idled like a conversation held outside a door. Emily stepped onto tarmac that still radiated the day's stored heat and followed the operative toward a gray building with no number, only a small camera that blinked once like a person choosing to remember your face. Inside was the color of caution, a reception half-desk that didn't welcome so much as confirm, a scanner that read not only shapes but the way blood carries its own music. She placed her palm on glass. The machine exhaled a tone, a chord, not a beep, and the door unlocked. A thin man with lenses perched low on his nose waited beyond, the sort of analyst whose arrogance was a defense against the loneliness of being right too often. He looked at her as if examining a forgery under poor light. "Captain Morgan," he said, the captain a test more than respect. "We require verification." "You will or the system will?" Emily asked. "The system," he replied, relieved to have a righteous shield. He gestured to a mat table in a room that had chosen acoustics over empathy. "Identifiers." She set down the silver card. Scuffed, soft-edged, heavier than it appeared. He didn't touch it. His handheld scanner did. A web of light crawled the surface. "Expired," the analyst announced too quickly. She slid a single round from her pocket and set it beside the card. Long, dull brass. On the case wall, so faint you had to tilt it for gloss, an engraving revealed itself like a secret deciding to be generous. SPC-17, Ghost. The analyst's lips parted, curiosity almost beating cynicism. He angled a different reader over the metal. The room's air tightened. On the handheld screen, a watermark rose like a photograph surfacing in the bath. A holographic stamp nested in the alloy itself, rotating through three shapes. A triangle with gaps at the corners, a blank circle, a line of text that refused to be caught by the eye. "Where did you—" he began, then stopped, remembering the game. "Ask no questions to which you don't want to hear silence for an answer." He pressed his thumb to his own verification pad, authorizing the next door to open. In the conference room, the decor was governance. Glass table, chairs that forced posture, a jug of water that admitted thirst without indulging it. The operative who'd fetched her took a position by the wall and became furniture. Another man entered. Dark suit, no tie, plain wedding band that flashed only when he moved quickly. He didn't speak at first. He crossed to her with a composure that made composure look like something else, relief untaught to smile. He placed a sealed gray envelope on the table, the twin of the one from the shop, this one marked with a second stamp. Oval, direct. His fingers brushed hers, and in that brush lived something the room had no clearance to recognize. "Hello?" he said softly. "Hello," she returned. The analyst cleared his throat, offended by anything unsanctioned. "Agent Hale will conduct the briefing," he said, as if labeling would erase what he had seen. The man in the suit, Hale, did not look away from Emily. "You came fast," she said. "I always will," he answered, and the analyst's pen stopped moving for a beat, as if in mechanical solidarity with discomfort. Karen's pen had clicked. This man's did not. He wore no weapon Emily could see. He wore the absence of fear like a professional courtesy to the moment. Hale turned, flickered the wall screen alive. A dossier unfolded in light. 3 photos. A map of a city Emily knew only as grids and exits. A string of dates that lined up to make a threat. In the corner, the triangle with gaps emblem hovered, refusing to let its geometry resolve. "Target Alpha," Hale said. "Domestic activation. We thought the node was foreign. It isn't. It's here." "Motivation?" Emily asked. "Money. Resentment. A contract you refused 5 years ago," the analyst said, the last detail in his voice like a small victory. "Congratulations. It held a grudge." Emily showed nothing. The snow taught her that. "Collateral risk?" "High," Hale said. "Children nearby. A school 3 blocks off the probable course." The room adjusted its temperature. Or maybe she did. "When?" "Window opens in 36 hours, Hale said. "We need you now." The analyst bristled. "We need to confirm who we need," he corrected. "Respectfully, we cannot mobilize a program that was formally sunsetted after I was listed as KIA," Emily finished for him. A clerical kindness. He flinched. She let him. Hale reached for the silver card. "There's a thread embedded in older credentials," he said to the analyst, purely instructional. "Quantum tag. The card answers the question before you think to ask it." "That isn't in the documentation," the analyst snapped. Correct, Hale said. It wasn't your clearance. The door opened. A woman older than the room's budget entered without introducing herself. She smelled faintly of bitter tea and decisions. Her hair had gone white in a pattern that suggested she had shared windows with sunrise on purpose. Everyone straightened without knowing why. Emily didn't. Respect doesn't require choreography. Captain, the woman said, I am no one whose name you need. The president signed your recall because I placed it on the desk and said the word now. Do you accept? I don't refuse, Emily answered. Good, the woman said, letting the syllable sit on the table like a coin. Because the alternative is asking 3 men to approximate you. They won't die. Others will. The analyst's face pinched. Ma'am, protocols are for the board, she said without heat. Leave us. He left, hunger and offense wrestling their way out the door. The operative by the wall remained wall. The woman looked at Hale, then at Emily, then at the silver ring under the cuff of his sleeve. I'm told you two have a private life, she said. That is your problem. My problem is the map, and who crosses it. Understood, Emily said. Hale slid a thin case across the glass. Inside, nested like instruments, lay pieces that were not guns and therefore were more dangerous. Signal traps, a stiletto antenna that could listen plain through concrete, a set of contact lenses with a shimmer at the rim. At the bottom, a small black wafer, no larger than a coin. On its face, etched so lightly you might call it vanity if you didn't know, the same emblem, triangle with corners not touching. You remember the lenses, Hale said. Only when it snows, she replied, the ghost of a smile near her eyes. He touched the wafer. This kills the job if it becomes wrong, he said, so quietly the room almost pretended not to hear. Jobs don't become wrong, Emily said. People do. Then this kills the people, the woman said, matter of fact. Including you if it must. I do not enjoy that part, but I don't avoid it. Emily studied the wafer a heartbeat longer, then closed the case. Understood. The analyst, summoned by his own curiosity more than by anyone else, returned with a folder and an expression that wanted to be smug and failed. One more verification, he said, setting his scanner to hover over the bullet she'd brought. The hologram obediently spun through its sequence. Triangle, circle, had text. He froze the frames, enlarged the line that had refused to be read. Words settled into shape. Silence, then power. He blinked. Is that? A motto, Hale said, not an instruction manual. Emily reached forward and spun the bullet on the table. It hummed once and settled pointing east, the way a compass needle stops arguing with itself when shown a magnet. She felt the familiar quiet arrive, the one that came after the bell on the pine table, after the breath stilled, before the trigger broke. In that quiet, she had always known who she was. Send the packet to my device, she said. 1 hour to prep. We brief en route. Hale nodded. The woman who ran out of names inclined her head as if to say, we are not done being human, even here. As Emily stood, Hale's hand brushed hers again. The softest contact, nothing to file. He looked like a man who had taught himself to be a building and was suddenly remembering he used to be a bridge. I'll be on comms the whole time, he said. You always are, she answered. They walked back the way they had come. Scanners cord, corridors hush, door choosing to remember a face. Outside, the airfield glittered with the illusion of ordinary industry. A second helicopter waited with its nose pointed toward a skyline she had not planned to see from above again. Before she climbed in, a young tech jogged up, breathless with the enthusiasm of people who have not yet learned which questions cost. Ma'am, he said, extending a tablet. Sign for chain of custody? He realized too late he had called her ma'am like a grocery clerk. He flushed. Emily took the stylus, wrote nothing anyone could read, and handed it back. What's your exit plan? She asked him without malice. He blinked. My what? Where you go when the first plan gets loud, she said. He stared, then nodded, chastened and weirdly grateful for the gift of a better future he would have to invent. The rotors wound up, discipline made visible. Hale squeezed her hand once in the shadow of the machine, where cameras could not turn gravity into gossip. Come back, he said. I always do, she lied and climbed aboard. The door slid. The world shrank to instruments and wind. Through the window, the river wrote its patient S through the city. If someone in a gun shop happened to look up at that moment, they would have seen a dark insect cutting east and thought insect, not omen. In the seat opposite, a small case rested against her knee. She flipped it open again, touched the bullet with the ghost engraving, then the wafer that ended things, when ending was the only mercy left. She closed the case and let her palm rest on it, feeling the hum of the engine travel through the metal into bone. Silence, then power, the words on the hologram had said. But the sequence she knew was never a straight line. Sometimes you take the shot, and the silence comes after. Sometimes you make the silence so the shot never has to. Below, the city offered contours. Above, the clouds forgot to predict. In between, where she lived, the work waited without applause. The morning after the airfield, the gun store opened under a sky that couldn't decide on weather. It made sense, neither could the people unlocking the door. The manager rolled up the grate and stood a long time with his hand on the switch, as if he could rewind the last 24 hours with enough pressure. Inside, the fractured range pane waited like a confession that hadn't learned to whisper. Karen brewed coffee strong enough to apologize. The old-timer arrived 5 minutes before his usual, cigar unlit, hands quiet. At 9:12, the bell chimed and 2 men entered wearing the uniform that isn't a uniform. Neutral suits, scuffed shoes, eyes that inventory exits as a reflex. They didn't flash credentials. They placed a gray envelope on the counter. The seal was embossed with a triangle whose corners didn't touch. "Manager on duty?" the taller one asked. The manager lifted a hand, surprised at how steady it looked. The agent slid the envelope closer. Inside, a single page with 2 paragraphs and a signature that lived most days 3 doors from the Oval. It wasn't a threat. It was a request written in the grammar of authority. "Non-disclosure and chain of custody," the shorter man said, gentle as a good nurse. "We'll take statements. You'll keep names out of your mouths for 90 days. In return, the videos your customers thought they took won't ruin your week." "What videos?" Karen asked, then colored because she already knew. The agent smiled without showing teeth. "Exactly." The blogger drifted in shortly after, sheepish, phone in hand like an apology. "My cloud, glitched," he said to no one in particular. "Everything from yesterday. Gone." "Clouds do that," the old-timer muttered. "Sit," the tall agent said, inviting rather than commanding. He laid a small mat case on the counter and opened it for the manager's eyes only. Inside was a cartridge under glass, the same long brass, the same faint engraving along the case wall. SPC-17, Ghost. When he tilted it, a hologram rose like breath on cold air. A triangle, a blank circle, then 3 words that took their time to resolve. Silence, then power. "This is a ballistics watermark," the agent said. "Buried in alloy. Pre-ban, not counterfeit. If anyone tells you they've seen one in the wild, they're either lying or they were in the room yesterday." The manager's mouth wanted to ask, "Why show me this?" but his eyes thanked the man instead. Sometimes truth arrives like a weight lifted, not added. "Were we in danger?" Karen asked, fingers white around a paper cup. "You were in a store with ordinary risks," the agent said, "and an extraordinary witness." He turned to the teenager, who hovered near the holster display, suddenly aware of his elbows. "You did well, son." The boy swallowed. "I just listened." "Most people don't," the agent said, as if awarding a medal, then closed the case, the ghost cartridge vanishing back into protected context. He gathered signatures, traded cards that weren't cards but phone numbers etched on memory. Call if anyone comes asking questions they shouldn't know to ask, and left them standing around the counter like people who had seen lightning strike twice and felt both lucky and held to account. By lunch, whispers came in from the outer circles. The collector's chat, the ex-cop's private thread, the influencer's DM group that called itself a guild because no one had told them hubris was a myth with receipts. "Did you see? Was she for real?" The links they shared returned static or a polite federal seal. The gap where ridicule should have gone filled with something that looked a lot like respect and felt embarrassingly like regret. The ex-cop, restless with the taste of his own certainty curdling, showed up at noon. He hovered near the counter until the manager looked up. You need range glass replaced, he offered, like help might balance a scale. We'll handle it, the manager said. Then after a beat, he hadn't planned to leave. You could apologize to the kid. The ex-cop turned, surprised to find the teenager in the corner, cleaning rental eye protection with care beyond his pay grade. He walked over, a man trying on a smaller version of himself. You did good, he said, the words like a foreign currency he wasn't sure spent here. Should have shut up and listened. The kid nodded, eyes wider than usual. Karen, witnessing, set a fresh cup of coffee by the register and didn't click her pen for almost an hour. Airside, the world behaved like purpose. In the cabin, Hale passed Emily a second envelope. Lighter, more personal, the paper that high offices save for late nights. The emboss wasn't the triangle this time. It was the simple curve of a signature she'd learned to recognize by the way the J liked to drag its heel. Recall letter, he said, for your records. It will vanish on its own in 12 hours. She didn't open it. She knew what it said. She'd been living under its implication since the rotor wash hit the storefront glass. She slid it into a pocket. The gesture had the domestic intimacy of someone tucking away a grocery list. It was not domestic at all. They had left the analyst to his policies and the woman with white hair to her weather. Here there were just rotors, headsets, and a checklist that had inherited the shape of ritual from religion. Hale studied her the way a man studies a harbor he's anchored in during storms. You shouldn't have kept that bullet, he said, not accusing. It kept me, she answered. She turned the long brass in her hand, letting the etched letters touch bone where the skin is thinnest. When you disappear for a living, you need an object that refuses to forget your weight. He glanced at the band on his ring finger, then at hers. Thin, steel, scuffed. A pair that looked more like equipment than promise. We had that too, he said quietly. We do, she corrected, gentle, and the cabin air found a new equilibrium as if the word had reset pressure. He nodded once and returned to the packet. Traffic cams around Alpha's last known. 2 entrances, 3 egress. He likes service corridors. He's rehearsing something he hasn't memorized yet. Which means he'll get loud when he misses a line, she said. She slid in the contact lenses from the gray case, the world shifting half a degree warmer, edges annotating themselves in the periphery, distances, faces, the way wind would migrate through an alley. Hale watched the small change and felt the larger one settle in his chest. Love for people like them was most visible in the ways it refused to ask for pause. You'll have 2 in the outer cordon, he said. No more. We can't afford a footprint. We never could, she replied. That was the point. He smiled, real, brief, the kind you get to keep because no one filmed it. You haven't changed. Neither have you, she said. And for a moment, the 2 of them weren't ranks or recall orders or ghosts with payroll. They were the private fact of a kitchen light at 2 a.m. A shared apple cut with the same knife, silence that wasn't absence but companionship turned inward. Then the pilot called out the approach vector and work put its hand back on their shoulders. Elsewhere, revelation migrated in smaller ways. The collector, once proud of glass cases nobody touched, spent an hour alone with an old notebook, running his finger over a list of rare acquisitions he'd boasted about at dinners. He stopped on a line, phantom proto-rig, rumored, and drew a single line through it slowly, as one edits a lie into an admission of ignorance. He closed the book and for the first time in years dialed his father for advice instead of an audience. The retired ranger, who had worn his scars like argument, took a long walk without his cane and found himself outside a VFW hall he usually avoided because grief has a way of turning into stale beer and stories that get louder to survive their own emptiness. He went in anyway. He didn't tell a story. He listened to a boy young enough to be his grandson talk about a tour no one back home could picture. When it was over, the ranger squeezed his shoulder once. It wasn't absolution. It was a relay. Karen locked up at close with the manager and didn't check her reflection in the door. You think she'll come back? She asked. He wiped the counter, the motions meditative now, not mindless. She said she would walk out the same way she walked in, he said, which wasn't an answer, but it was the right kind of sentence to leave alone. He paused in the range hallway. The fractured pane still held its small, perfect hole. He lifted a hand to the web of cracks and, without quite intending to, placed his palm flat against the cold. It felt like a scripture you read with skin. Night found Emily behind a different pane of glass, one that moved because the helicopter did. The city unwound below in dim threads. She checked the wafer in its foam cradle, the job ender, the mercy killer, and set it down. She did not plan to use it. She never planned to. Plans are maps, mercy is weather. Hale's voice came through the headset, a private channel under the professional one. "Do you want me to tell your father?" he asked. She considered the pine table, the brass timer, the way her father had looked at her over supper with a gaze that felt like a measurement and a blessing he didn't know how to word. "He already knows," she said. "He feels the bell even when it doesn't ring." "Your mother?" Hale asked softer. "She will say I should wear something that doesn't wrinkle," Emily said, and smiled to herself in a way that archived warmth for later use. The pilot called out wind shear. The hull adjusted its mind, and the craft slid into the approach trough as if guided by patience. In her pocket, the recall letter warmed to body temperature, then cooler again as the cabin breathed. Downriver, a boat cut across the current without running lights. Upstream, a warehouse pivoted from storage to stage. On a nearby block, a school's janitor finished mopping a hall and checked the lock on the side door twice. Revelation is rarely the thunderclap. It is the quiet map of things aligning. Emily turned the ghost round between forefinger and thumb one last time, then slid it back into the case. She tapped the lens interface. Overlays melted and sharpened. Centuries of soldier math reduced to a thin crescent of light at the edge of a human eye. "Ground in 2, the pilot said. "On your mark," Hale answered. Emily breathed the way she taught the kid with the blue gun. Slow, honest, like speaking to a skittish horse. The bell inside her did not ring. It didn't need to. The silence had already arrived. They called it a storm because storms make a clean villain of weather. But what came after Emily left the gun store was not weather. It was gravity reasserting itself. Things fell in the direction they had always been leaning. On Monday, the influencer uploaded a rectangle of nothing. He titled it, "The Ghost at the Gun Store, Exclusive," and watched his own face reflected in the black. A man in a ring light waiting for fame to land. The comments didn't mock. There was nothing to point at. But something sour seeped through the thread. People recognized the scent of a story that wanted applause without witness. One of his earlier videos, a compilation of strangers mispronouncing terms, resurfaced. A woman in one clip had clearly asked him not to film. He had filmed anyway. The platform did what platforms do when they sense a shift in wind. It nudged, then pushed, then quietly flagged his library. Sponsors paused in that non-committal way sponsorships do. He wrote a Notes app apology that read like a receipt. "Should have listened," the teenager from the shop messaged him privately, not to scold, but because he had learned that sentences with the fewest adjectives travel farthest. The influencer stared at the message a long time before typing back, "Teach me." For the first time in months, he did not hit send. He closed the app, then the laptop, then the blinds. The collector's reckoning came polished. He had taken pride in showings where expensive lighting kissed expensive steel, and guests said the word provenance with the long O of inheritance. Now a friend forwarded a thread from a niche forum where anonymous hands had started to pick at his claims with tweezers. From photographs alone, they caught 2 details he had missed or ignored. A mismatch in the milling around a base plate, a bolt that belonged to a later run. Replica, one wrote, not cruelly, or wishful. The collector felt a heat he could not file under anger, a flush of being seen without the costume that made him himself. He drafted a rebuttal, then deleted it. He went to the safe room, opened a case, and lifted a rifle by its throat. He knew immediately what he had known all along. By Wednesday, he wrote to the forum, under his own name, which was a kind of unarmed surrender. "You were right," he posted. "I bought the story, not the piece." Replies arrived like rain. Not gloating, just weather. A stranger sent him a link to a museum conservator who offered free authentication consults for private owners, willing to be honest. The collector set an appointment and, in the space made by the removal of a lie, phoned his father again and asked about a small, unremarkable rifle they'd shot together when he was 12. "Come by Saturday," the old man said. "It still knows our hands." The retired ranger's consequence looked like relief from far away. Early in the week, a podcast invited him to set the record straight about female posers in tactical spaces. He heard himself beginning the cadences that had served him when pain needed to be turned into authority, and caught his reflection in the dark window over the sink, mouth opening where doubt should have been. "I'm going to pass," he said into the phone, and when the producer pushed, said it again with the confidence of someone who had finally found a better use for silence. He went to the VFW hall 2 nights in a row and listened more than he spoke. He pressed a younger man's shaking hand and did not tell a story to smother another's. The ex-cop's reckoning had teeth. A clip surfaced from years earlier in which he mocked a woman in a training class for flinching at noise. The woman, now an EMT featured in a local paper for pulling a kid from a flipped car, was tagged by an account with 6 followers and a long memory. The department where the ex-cop occasionally consulted on range safety reconsidered the relationship. He smoldered, then cooled, then found himself at the gun store on a slow Friday afternoon, standing in front of the teenager with a blue training pistol on the counter between them. "Teach me the breathing thing again," he said. The boy did. This time the ex-cop listened without composing a defense in parallel. His finger found the straight-back press like a confession. Karen's reckoning arrived as a memo. HR phrased it as feedback, which is how institutions file away epiphanies they do not want to credit to a single afternoon. "Comments to customers," it read. Bullet points without bullets. Assumptions about presentation and competence. In the break room, she laughed too brightly to prove she could, then went quiet when the old-timer slid a cup toward her, the way a man offers truce. Later, alone where the security camera could not see, she stood in front of a mirror and tried to make her mouth form the words, "I am sorry." It took 3 tries. The next time a woman in a threadbare hoodie entered with a question that sounded like apology, Karen did something radical and free. She answered without performance. The manager's reckoning was gentler than he deserved. A regional rep called, voice padded with legal, and asked if everything at the store was under control. He almost laughed. What control could he claim over a day that had barely agreed to be linear? But he said yes. After hanging up, he phoned his daughter between classes. "You remember the list we made? Exit plan?" he asked. She rolled her eyes fondly. "Under the desk, out the side, call Dad last because he'll drive like a fool." He breathed, the kind that isn't relief so much as grateful inventory. He sent her a text that said only, "Good." Customers noticed the fracture in the range glass had been left up an extra day before replacement. "Why the delay?" one asked. The manager shrugged. "Reminds us what we owe the room," he said. When the new pane went in, clear, proud, without history, he salvaged a thin spall of the old glass and tucked it in his desk. Sometimes you keep the shard so you don't have to keep the shame. The teenager's consequence was a promotion so small it barely made sound. More hours, a key to the back cabinet, the manager's trust. He started a notebook, the kind with graph squares, where he copied diagrams he found online and notes from conversations he had with customers who could teach without needing to be seen teaching. On the first page, he wrote in block letters, "Front sight is truth. Rear sight is a committee." He laughed when he finished, realizing he had written poetry and procedure in the same font. People asked whether the woman in the windbreaker would return. The manager told the truth that left everyone room to breathe. "She came in like a customer. We treated her like a story. Next time, we'll try the other way around." The old-timer stopped bringing his cigar inside. Karen stopped clicking her pen. No one at the store reached out to media. It turned out silence could be a brand. The broader world did what it always does when it sniffs myth. It tried to buy it. A streaming service commissioned a pilot. A novelist pitched a treatment with too much leather. A podcast network emailed the manager a contract with the sentence, "We honor anonymity," in a paragraph that would have ended it. He did not reply. The email joined the other fossils in the inbox graveyard. If Emily noticed any of this, it was in the way a seismologist notices an aftershock by the behavior of a needle 1,000 miles from the epicenter. Her days had become narrower, which is what happens when you choose a corridor that leads somewhere other people don't want to see. She moved with the job as if the job were weather and she were a farmer, alert to patterns, uninterested in philosophy while rain was falling or not. She did not phone the store. She did not drive by after dark to look at the light behind the blinds. She did not check the teenager's feed to see whether he had posted a photograph of blue plastic with a quote that would make her wince. She carried one object that belonged to that day, the long brass cartridge with the faint letters pressed into its skin like the memory of a pressure. Sometimes when the world narrowed too far and a hallway looked like an answer key, she rolled it between finger and thumb to remind herself that proof and faith can share a pocket. Hale kept his promise of presence, which is the only promise that counts in their profession. He appeared in rooms at the edge of vision and let her do the work. When he spoke, it was with the economy of true partners. North window, 3 inches. Wind is a liar today. Hold, the janitor is more courageous than the plan. You'll hate me if I say the school is safe out loud, so I won't. She didn't say thank you so much as allow the second breath to follow the first. There were other reckonings, the kind that never trend, because they arrive in cubicles and kitchens. A father who had been teaching his son to intimidate apologized for teaching the wrong thing. A woman who had left a self-defense class after the first snide comment returned and found the room different. Sometimes rooms change because the person who can change them decides that's their contribution. A mod on a forum wrote and pinned a new rule. No posting strangers' faces without consent. Skill is not spectacle. It was read more times than it was obeyed. That's how rules begin. And then there was Trisha. No, not here. That was someone else's map. In this city, the person who had felt most wronged by Emily's competence could not find a sentence that preserved dignity while confessing envy, so she chose a different door. She signed up for a class taught by a woman who had never been a ghost. Just good. She arrived early, listened more than she spoke, and left without telling anyone where she had been. It counted. By Friday, the shop felt different in the way rooms do after air has been circulated and someone bothers to oil the hinges. The new range pane shone with the smugness of undisturbed surfaces. The old-timer bought ear protection that actually fit. The ex-cop cleaned the rental holsters as if the straps were his. Karen, confronted with a man in a suit who wore entitlement like cologne, found herself saying, "We'll help if you let us," and marveled at the way the sentence changed both of them. The reckoning did not end in headlines. It ended in small policies and rephrased sentences and habits that bent toward respect because everyone had been afforded a precise view of what the opposite looked like. On a quiet afternoon, the manager stood alone by the range window. He touched the new glass, remembering the old fracture, then closed his eyes and replayed the ping in his head until it became a metronome, then a bell, then nothing. He didn't know where Emily was. He assumed that meant she was where she belonged. Sometimes, for no good reason, the teenager would stand in the doorway to the shop and imagine a helicopter's thrum laid under the traffic's sigh. He would smile and bring a broom to a corner that didn't need sweeping. He had decided to apply for an apprenticeship with a machinist across town. He wrote the email and sent it before he could call it a dream and file it under later. The city went on. The river wrote its S. Somewhere in the sky, a dark insect might have cut east or west. It didn't matter which to people who had learned to keep their front sight honest and their exit plans practiced. Stories did not need to be retold to remain true. What remained after the storm wasn't silence. It was a different sound. The ordinary creak of a door opening for someone who looks like they don't belong, and is in fact exactly where they're supposed to be. The city slept under low clouds that dulled sound and color both, as if the world were half exhaling. Emily walked alone along a canal where warehouses leaned into their reflections, water trembling with the pulse of passing trains. Her boots left no rhythm on the concrete, and even the sodium lamps seemed to dim in deference. It was not hiding, she'd outgrown that word, but maintenance. Ghost required calibration. Between assignments, between names, she liked to reassemble the shape of being human in small rituals. Bitter coffee from street vendors, watching strangers argue softly about things that mattered only today, the smell of rain on iron. She'd been back 48 hours. The mission's aftermath was a blur of reports, debriefs, and the soft violence of bureaucracy trying to make sense of instinct. Target Alpha had dissolved without noise. A detonation prevented by precision was no headline, and she liked it that way. She turned a corner and saw Hale waiting beside a parked sedan, the kind of car that exists by being forgettable. He wasn't supposed to be there. Protocol demanded clean separation after field closure, but their whole history was the art of breaking rules quietly. Your timing's off, she said as she approached. The file only closed this morning. I know, he said. This isn't work. She raised a brow. You don't have another gear. He smiled without denying it. Come with me. They drove without destination, or rather toward a place neither had named in months. The outskirts blurred into farmland where frost glittered like shrapnel. Finally, Hale turned onto a narrow road lined with pines that had memorized her footsteps long ago. Her breath caught. You shouldn't know this route. You told me once, he said, in a letter I was never meant to keep. The cabin at the end of the road was small, slouched under years of weather, its porch light dead. She'd inherited it after her father's passing, though inheritance wasn't the word. He had left it to her as one leaves a mirror, quietly, without inscription. Hale killed the engine. Silence swelled until it became company. You came all this way for nostalgia, she asked. He shook his head. For closure. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and long memory. Dust lay on the table where her father's brass timer still waited, patient and unjudging. She brushed it once with her sleeve. It began to tick as if grateful. Hale leaned against the doorframe, watching. He trained you well, he said. He trained me to vanish. And yet you keep coming back. Because someone has to remember what the silence costs. He studied her face. Lines gentler than last year, tired in the way resolve gets tired but never collapses. Do you ever regret it? She smiled faintly. Regret is for things you wish you hadn't done. This is for things I had to. They sat in the hush that follows shared truth. Outside, the wind combed through pines in long strokes. She could almost hear the bell under the snow, the one her father had used to mark breath instead of time. Hale broke the quiet first. They're shuttering what's left of the program, declassifying fragments, erasing others. We're relics now. Ghosts don't age, she said. They fade. You could come back to the surface, he offered. Consultancy. Teach. Train the next generation. Emily looked at the timer, its hands circling toward 0. Teach them what? How to forget their names without losing their souls? How to hold a line that keeps moving? He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. When the bell chimed, a soft, perfect note, she stood. I'll make tea, she said, as if they were ordinary people in an ordinary hour. Hale followed her into the small kitchen. While the kettle hissed, he found the courage to ask what had burned through him since Belarus, since the first recall, since forever. Why do you keep the bullet? She glanced at the brass casing on the shelf, catching the faint letters, SPC-17 Ghost under the weak light. Because it reminds me there's always one left, she said, for ending a story or starting one. He nodded slowly. Which is this? I haven't decided. The kettle shrieked. She poured, handed him a mug. They drank in silence. Steam fogged the window and drew brief ghosts of their faces that faded faster than they could breathe them back. Hale set his cup down carefully. You know the kid from the shop? He wrote a post about you, not by name, just a story about a stranger who taught him that control isn't loud. It's compassionate. Emily's expression softened. Good, she said. If that's all they remember, that's enough. He wants to join the service. She shook her head. He'll do more good outside of it. The world doesn't need more ghosts. It needs witnesses. Hale smiled. That sounds like something you'd tell yourself to sleep. It works most nights. The silence between them was kind. She looked at him, not the operative, not the function, but the man who had stood beside her in every shadow that mattered. You should go before dawn. They'll notice. He hesitated, then stood, retrieving his coat. And you? I'll wait for the quiet to settle, she said. Then start walking again. He touched her shoulder briefly. Be careful. She met his eyes. Always. He left without sound, closing the door softly enough that it didn't echo. She sat alone at the table until the light outside began to turn. When the first thread of sun cut through the window, it struck the bullet on the shelf and made it glow. A tiny sunrise contained in metal. She picked it up, turned it in her palm, and thought about the store, the boy, Karen's nervous smile, the fractured glass that had once framed her own reflection. Every action had rippled outward. Every silence had left a sound behind. On the table lay the gray recall envelope, edges curling. She tore it open. Inside was a single line in Hale's handwriting, not the government's. You were never a ghost. You were the reminder that ghosts exist because the living forget. She closed her eyes and let the words anchor where faith usually hides. When she rose to leave, she didn't take much. Just the bullet, the timer, her coat. She left the cabin unlocked, the way her father had once trusted the forest not to steal what it already owned. Outside, frost cracked underfoot. Somewhere far off, a helicopter traced a route she did not need to follow. The sky bled from gray to pale amber, and for a moment, the whole world looked like it was holding its breath. Emily walked toward the road, her shadow long behind her, then shorter as the sun climbed. She wasn't disappearing this time. She was simply becoming smaller against the vastness that required no witness. In a city miles away, a teenager adjusted his stance at a range and took a slow, honest breath. A manager unlocked a door and felt, without knowing why, the brief weight of quiet pride. Somewhere else, Hale watched the horizon and imagined a figure in the distance walking into dawn, steady and unhurried. Silence, then power. The phrase returned, not command, but elegy. Emily smiled to herself and kept walking until even the wind forgot her name.